just to get started and catch up. Good afternoon. Uh-oh, got to wake you up. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, man, look at you. Is that what your constituents do to you when you say, good afternoon, everybody? All right. Now, before we begin our City Livability Awards, I'm pleased to recognize a member of our leadership who's contributed greatly to this organization. Juan Carlos Bermúdez was born in Santa Clara, Cuba. He came to the United States when he was 3 years old. In 2003, Juan Carlos Bermúdez was elected to be the first mayor of the new city of Doral, Florida. Now, Mayor Bermúdez has been an active and effective member of the Conference of Mayors. He served on our advisory committee. He chaired our International Affairs Committee, where he championed the cause of human rights across the globe. And in particular, he's highlighted the intimidation and persecution that freely elected mayors in Venezuela have faced at the hands of the central government. Mayor Bermúdez, we thank you for your service to this organization and wish you the very best in the future. And now it's time for the 33rd Annual City Livability Awards presentation. Each year, the City Livability Awards honor mayors for exemplary leadership and commitment to enhancing the quality of life of America's cities. By the way, for a second, can we give a big hand to our servers? Let's give them a big hand. I apologize. You know, I grew up in a family where we had to serve ourselves, so whenever I get served, I like to say thank you. Thank you to all of our servers in their beautiful Orlando gear. Now, today's award-winning programs represent countless dynamic and innovative programs that are transforming cities across the country. I said today, earlier in my speech, that I've learned a lot from all of you in the 7 years I've been participating in this conference. And I can tell you, whether they're mayors of small towns, mid-sized cities, or global cities like my own, we all have something, a best practice to share. And so for the past 22 years, Waste Management, Inc. has sponsored this much valued and much appreciated program. And because of the high value that waste management places on helping our communities to be better, stronger, and safer places in which we live. Now, we're grateful for the support of Waste Management, which makes our City Livability program possible. And I'm pleased to introduce Paul Pistono, Vice President of the Public Sector Solutions with Waste Management, who will announce the 2012 City Livability Award winners. Mr. Pistono? We welcome you to the 80th Annual Conference of Mayors.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. You've done a tremendous job of leading the conference and, of course, leading your city, which Waste Management has had the privilege of serving for the past several years. And I'd also welcome Mayor Nutter of Philadelphia, who I realize is not here, but for taking over President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Waste Management and the City of Philadelphia have had a long-standing partnership, and we wish Mayor Nutter and the best of luck in leading the Conference of Mayors. And also thank you, Mayor Dyer, for hosting all of us in this beautiful city of Orlando. And Tom Cochran, with your day-to-day leadership as the Conference of Mayors CEO and Executive Director, we know this conference wouldn't be possible without you. So I salute you too. Waste Management is thrilled to be associated with these awards. that recognize worthy programs to improve the quality of life of our cities. We know that many of you have sustainability, recycling, and waste diversion goals, and we're ready to help you achieve those objectives. So now for the awards. I will begin with the category of Small City Livability Award winners. These are cities that have a population of 100,000 or less. In this category, there are 10 winners. 4 mayors have been recognized for Honorable Mention Award. 5 mayors have been recognized for Outstanding Achievement Awards, and 1 mayor will achieve the first place award. I will ask each mayor who has received an honorable mention to stand when named, and I ask the audience to please hold your applause until we have completed naming the 4 honorable mention award winners. Please turn your attention to the video screens. Mayor Elizabeth Tisdall of Evanston, Illinois, for Women Out Walking. Mayor Michael McGlynn for Medford, Massachusetts, for Go Green Medford program. Mayor Beth Talabisco from Tamarack, Florida, for Catch Kids Club at Challenger Elementary. And Mayor C. Kim Bracey from York, Pennsylvania, for Take 10 program. Please join me in a round of applause for these mayors and their fine programs. And now I will present the 6 Small City Award-winning mayors. Please direct your attention to the screens as the 6 mayors are named alphabetically by the name of city. I will then name the first place winning city. The 6 remaining Small City Livability finalists listed alphabetical are Mayor Jack Hoffman of Lake Oswego, Oregon, for the Lake Oswego Reeds. Mayor Jill Techdal of Napa for a flood protection project downtown and riverfront revitalization. Mayor Al Larson of Schaumburg, Illinois, for the intergenerational produce garden. And Mayor Joseph McElvin of Sumter, South Carolina, for the Central Carolina Technical College Health Services Center. And Mayor Jeffrey Prang of West Hollywood, California, for the West Hollywood Library. And Mayor Jerry Moau of West Palm Beach for the Career Catalyst program. Before I announce the first place winner for small cities, let's recognize each of these mayors by asking them to stand and give them a round of applause. And the winner of the first place award for small cities is Mayor Jerry Moau of West Palm Beach, Florida, for the Career Catalyst program.
People come to the library in West Palm Beach for a variety of reasons. Quite often it isn't for the books.
Excellent girl, your spine, top that.
It's more than just the library of when I was growing up. It's an amazing community center.
Breathing in.
I talk about it all the time to my friends. You gotta come, they have so many programs.
We're gonna learn some new skills today. We're gonna build on what we learned in last class.
Career Catalyst was basically a grant that we wrote with the Workforce Alliance. The staff here had identified the fact that a lot of people use the library to look for jobs, and a lot of people need a lot more computer skills.
This is asking, where do we want to get our picture from?
We've been able to have a great conversation with them and start to implement services in order to try and help the library population.
Anything that had to do with getting a job, we tried to teach.
By tapping into everybody's expertise, everybody has a small piece of the puzzle, but if we can make it all fit together, it works really well.
You know, whenever you can leverage your funds and come together and each do a certain piece of what they do best, is a win-win for everyone.
About 1,000 people will train via Career Catalyst.
And as we prepare people to move into the workforce and we improve their job skills, not only will they have the advantage of getting a job, but the businesses will be hiring somebody who's well prepared.
When I finally did get a job, it was in a field completely different than anything I'd ever done. And those skills that I learned in those classes that I paid nothing for, that actually got me the job.
The library has good support from the city. We've had a very intelligent city commission and mayor who have realized the value that the library gives to the citizens.
What's happening?
I think it's very important that people come to our library and use the resources that are here.
You always have to think of your audience.
We were able to better help the folks who were seeking help in our library.
Look around, try and find those community partnerships that can better serve your people.
It just takes talking to each other.
Then we're going to close that dialogue box.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to take a minute to say thank you to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and in particularly the Waste Management Company. We are so proud of our library in West Palm Beach. It's an amazing space, and it's a place where really people from all socioeconomic levels come together. And every day, we are breaking down that digital divide with the computers in our library. Every day, we are addressing the achievement gap with the work that we do with after-school programs. And as I said earlier, this is really a community facility. It's a community center that's used by the community on an amazing basis. So we're very proud of the work that we do in our library. We're proud of our librarian, our library staff, and everybody who works there, our volunteers as well. So thank you very much for this.
Did she get her award? No, that's her. That's hers. Yeah. You gonna ship it?
Yeah, we'll just ship it. I don't see the other one.
Where the others? Yeah, there it is.
Okay, and now we'll move to the large city category. That is cities with populations of 100,000 and greater. We will begin by recognizing the 4 mayors who have received an honorable mention. Again, I ask the audience to please hold your applause until we have named all 4 mayors. Would the mayors please stand as I read your names and programs? Please turn your attention to the video screens. Mayor Melvin Kip Holden of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for North Boulevard Town Square. Mayor Masso of Frisco, Texas, for Rocket Ride, Discovering the Community Benefits of Arts and Sciences, North Texas. Mayor Jeremiah Healy of Jersey City, New Jersey, for 365 Days of Green. And Mayor Francis Slay of St. Louis, Missouri, for Cycling Initiative. And now please join me in a round of applause for these mayors and their programs. Congratulations to our honorable mention mayors in the large city category. And now let us recognize the 6 mayors remaining in the large city category. Please turn your attention to the screens. Listed alphabetical by city, Mayor Thomas Menino of Boston, Massachusetts, for Boston Children Thrive. Mayor Bill Finch of Bridgeport, Connecticut, for Brownfield Remediation and Redevelopment Program. Mayor Pedro Segarra of Hartford, Connecticut, for Trash Drum and Art Program. Mayor Greg Fisher of Louisville, Kentucky, for Mayor's Give a Day a Week. And Mayor Buddy Dyer of Orlando, Florida, for Buy Local Orlando. And Mayor Jerry Saunders of San Diego, for Electric Vehicle Car Sharing Program with Car2Go. Before I announce the first place winner for large cities, let's join together in applause for these mayors and their representatives. And the winner of the Large City First Place City Livability Award is Mayor Greg Fisher of Louisville for Mayor's Give a Day a Week. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating Louisville.
Louisville was recognized as the International Model City for Compassion this year. You can say we're a compassionate city. How do we express that? So the idea of Give a Day was for people to show that through volunteerism and to have a massive movement of people helping each other.
April 15th to the 22nd is Mayor Fisher's annual Give a Day Week of Service.
Give a Day is a community effort to engage as many of our citizens and residents as possible for the betterment of the community.
A lot of people have never volunteered before. And you ask them, why not? And they say, I didn't know how to do it. So part of what we were able to do with Metro United Way was just simply go to a website and with a few clicks of the mouse, make it happen.
We have a lot of experience in the arena of recruiting volunteers and matching them up with their interests.
Set the goal, 55,000. We ended up with over 90,000 volunteers or acts of compassion throughout the week. I quickly proclaimed us as the most compassionate city in the world, and nobody has challenged that yet.
Give a Day meant so much to St. Joe's. We had more than 20 projects that we were really able to get done and wouldn't have been able to do without all these volunteer groups.
It enabled us to get the word out to our community about what our kids need, what we need, and the services that we offer.
We had over 200 volunteers that together gave 767 hours of service and came out to support St. Joe's in our mission of giving children a home.
The firefighters that have helped build this ramp have been a blessing to us in this community. They saw the need and they acted upon that. We're just grateful for that.
We have a great relationship with the church, and this just turned out terrific.
Lasting relationships were created between our residents and our organization and the community members who came forward to volunteer that week.
What are we making today?
The beauty of this is the opportunity in years ahead to continue to nurture this and really create a ritual that has a positive impact on our entire community.
Very nice. Now that's going to be an unusual color for a house. Anybody can do this. We didn't spend any extra money from a city standpoint to provide staffing or resources for Give a Day. Really what you're doing is just calling out the goodwill that resides in people already and using the power of the mayor's office to convene and inspire and make your community a better place.
It's really about making it easy for people to step up and find a way to become engaged in the life of the community.
All right, how things going in the kitchen?
Going well.
So my challenge to my fellow mayors listening to this is take us on. And then being a compassionate city, we'd have to help you beat us, of course, and we'd be delighted to do so.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to the Conference of Mayor and Waste Management. And look, as mayor, we all know that we have the responsibility for public safety and for growing jobs, but I think a central question for all cities is, what is the soul of our cities? What is that authentic thing that makes people want to live in your city or relocate to your city? How people connect with each other, how we build community in our cities. And the mayor should be the point person for that mission. And I think, we've heard throughout these past couple of days, and we feel it, that the country is wandering. We're trying to define who we are. Well, there's no better person to help lead that definition than mayors right now. In a manner, in a culture of entrepreneurship, of can-do, people want to believe in their neighborhoods, in their churches, in their cities, that something special is taking place there. So the tone for the city starts with each one of us in the community conversations that we have. I say a mayor needs the head of a capitalist or a head of an entrepreneur, but a mayor needs the heart of a social worker as well. And it's this type of feeling that led to the Give-A-Day, the creation of Give-A-Day. I have three big themes for our city. One is lifelong learning, because that leads to great jobs. The second is a healthy city, not just physical health, but mental health, spiritual health, environmental health, public safety. But the third is, how can we be an even more compassionate city? None of us have any money. That doesn't cost a dime for people to be compassionate toward each other, for people to love each other. And I want to tell you, when I started talking about compassion and love, these so-called political experts would come up and say, Mayor, you don't want to talk about compassion and love. That makes you sound soft. Well, I want to tell you, when I'm in a crowd and I talk about compassion, more people nod their head and smile than any other thing I talk about in the community. People want to connect with their hearts. They want to connect with their neighbors. They want to believe in each other. So I would encourage everybody to talk more about compassion and love in our cities. Now, so that's what led to Give-A-Day. So the question is, you don't watch the lips, you watch the action. So how do we express compassion? So I said, let's have the world's biggest volunteer effort. Let's set a world record for compassion. Of course, I have no idea what the world record is for compassion, but as mayor, you get to proclaim all kinds of things. People seem to agree with you. So I said, let's have 55,000 volunteers for this Give-A-Day week. We have a total population of 750,000. So there was tremendous energy, and as the week went on, and the media was a big partner of this, and we had great partnerships throughout. Momentum. We end up with over 90,000 volunteers and acts of compassion during this Give-A-Day week. 90,000 volunteers. So think about that. Over 10% of our population was out helping people. That's all. Reading to kids, helping build a habitat, going into the prisons, going into parts of town where people hadn't been before. So it gave people a connection with other people they hadn't connected with before. So it's that sense of community that ended up as the real winner of this. So look, after this, what I did, I proclaimed loud and clear, Louisville is the most compassionate city on the face of the earth. Okay? I proclaimed it. It was in the newspaper, so it is. Not one of you has contested that claim either, okay? So I would encourage all of us. Wouldn't that be wonderful if that was the headlines that we were reading in the newspaper tomorrow? L.A. challenges Louisville as most compassionate city. Seattle steps up to claim they're number one. I think people would prefer to see those headlines than some of the garbage we're reading here today. So again, we're honored to receive this award. It's on behalf of all the citizens of Louisville, obviously. Again, thanks to the Conference of Mayor, Waste Management for making this happen, and I look forward to working with you all, with all of y'all, to make us a more compassionate United States of America. Thank you.
That's awesome. You bet you.
Congratulations to all the mayors who have received this year's City Livability Awards. Thank you to all mayors for developing programs that can be replicated and adapted throughout the United States. And now, Mayor Villaraigosa, I return the program back to you.
Let's give a round of applause to all of our 2012 Livability Award winners. And now we'll transition to the second part of our lunch. I'm now pleased to welcome Hank Paulson to our meeting. We decided to go by first name basis today. We've developed a relationship over the last year and a half or so, and I can tell you I have a great deal of respect for him. You know, when you get to see somebody from afar, that's one thing. When you get to see him up close, I'll tell you, this is the real deal. Mr. Paulson served as U.S. Secretary of Treasury from 2006 to 2009. Many of you know, prior to that, he served as Chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs. As President of this Conference of Mayors, I've called on members of both parties to find common ground and address the critical problems that face our nation. And in that regard, Washington, D.C. could learn a lot from Hank Paulson. When our nation faced the very real possibility of an economic meltdown, he pushed forward a financial rescue plan for banks and the mortgage industry. Now, many on the left and many on the right were not happy, but Secretary Paulson looked past the politics and took decisive action. In 2011, the Secretary established the Paulson Institute, which is focused particularly on the U.S.-China relationship, and I was most fortunate to have accompanied Secretary Paulson last year when I went on a trade mission to China, and I saw his commitment firsthand to expanding job creation, exports, but also foreign direct investment. Now, at a time when mayors are more than ever looking to outside investors to create jobs in cities, I can think of no one better to be with us today. Secretary Paulson has asked that we engage in a discussion, so let me begin by asking him a few questions. We'll start with the economy.
Okay.
Look, the economy is on everybody's mind, from Main Street to Wall Street. We see tremendous concerns about the future prospects of economic growth and job creation. Do you think we remain on the road to recovery, or are we facing a potential backslide?
Antonio, I think we're on the road to recovery, but it's a very slow road. I see economic growth being slow for a good while. I think it's going to take a considerable amount of time to work through this high level of unemployment. I think it's only partly due to coming back from the huge downturn we had after the crisis, and I think it's also partly due to structural issues that we have, longer-term structural competitiveness issues. The consumer is highly levered, so we can't count on a big boost from the consumer. I'm sure you've all looked at what's happening in Europe. I think you're going to, given what's happening in Europe and elsewhere in the world with the slowdown, that's going to be a drag on the U.S. economy for some time. So we can be glad our economy is growing, but it's growing very slowly. And in terms of whether there's been a slight downturn over the last couple of months, I think there has been, but I don't tend to focus as much on the monthly economic data. I just take a little bit longer look, and I think it's the longer look says slow growth.
You know, it's in this time of the talking heads, everybody's focused on, you know, the monthly reports. You talked about structural problems facing us. Maybe identify a couple of them if you could.
Yeah, I think that if you take a look, I'd say U.S. competitiveness has been eroding for several decades. That the median household income was stagnant, didn't grow at all on an inflation-adjusted basis from 1997 to 2007. And for the 20 preceding years, the average American had the income grow at about 0.5% per year. So very, very slight growth. And this is, you know, there's been a lot of focus on income inequality, and there should be. But I think at the heart of this are competitiveness issues in our economy. And I think this can only be addressed through policy actions And I think that takes, you mentioned bipartisan support, I think that's what it takes. It takes compromise. We need a new tax system. Okay, of course we need more tax revenues, but the key question isn't that we need more tax revenues, it's what system will give us the revenues we need and let us create jobs and be competitive. We need entitlement reform, healthcare reform, Social Security reform. We need a new immigration system. And so we have a huge deficit issue. Debt is probably the biggest threat to our national security and our economic security. And as important as cutting is, we can't just cut our way out of this. We need pro-growth reforms. And so I think, as a matter of fact, I think one of the reasons for the financial crisis was we had flawed government policies. There's been a lot of focus on housing and all the programs that overstimulated housing and all of the, Fannie or Freddie or the interest rate, the mortgage interest rate deduction. Someone has $1 million home, they can deduct interest and so on. There hasn't been as much focus on just the government incentives for people to borrow. And it was more than a housing crisis. Going into the 2007, household debt was double what it had been historically. It was not sustainable. And I think one of the reasons for that was, look what's happened to the average American. Income not growing, struggling to keep up, so they borrowed too much, and there were plenty of incentives to do that.
You mentioned Europe. What do you see on the short term in terms of Europe, and on the long term, what will be the impact on the U.S. economy?
Well, first of all, Europe this is a long-term issue for Europe. Very, very much a long-term issue, because you see, I've often said that during our financial crisis, we saw the collision of politics and markets. Well, you're seeing that writ large in Europe, because the Europeans are strongly committed to keeping this monetary union together, which is unsustainable in its current form. And as we were talking about at lunch, right, that it's not going to work unless you can make it more of a political union. And that's a huge challenge, and it remains to be seen whether that can be done. And so this is very complex and politically ugly and difficult. So you know that this is going to go on for a good period of time, I think for years, and there's going to be economic stress. So clearly there's economic stress now, there's going to be more economic stress. But what you need to get to your question about the U.S. economy and the risks to the U.S. economy, what the Europeans need to do is avoid catastrophe. And catastrophe would be big systemic bank failures, or a big, one of the larger countries having a messy bankruptcy. So the key to them is, while this political process grinds along, to come up with ways to stabilize the banks and to build a big enough firewall or financial cushion to support the EU. And that's essential. If they don't, there's a very big risk to the U.S. economy. And what you're finding is politicians are doing, I think, as much as they think they can. But they're doing what they can, but it's not what markets demand. You got banks bailing out sovereigns, which are bailing out banks, which are bailing out sovereigns, and no one's making the tough decisions as who's going to pay for it, or how do you have competitiveness with the countries on the periphery. So usually when politics and markets clash, markets win. Your question about the short term, I'm not predicting catastrophe in the short term. I think I'm hoping, and I believe the best reasonable case And the most likely case is that we don't get the messy the bankruptcies of a big bank. And in that most likely case, I think what you see is Europe continuing to be just a modest drag on what's happening here. But there's that risk, and you have to say by far the biggest risk in the global economy right now is Europe. And it's not easy for those policymakers over there to deal with this. It's really going to test Western democracy, not Western, but democracy in Europe before it's all done.
Think for a moment. You have a magic wand. You get to say to the Congress, job number one is job creation. What are a few steps that you think the Congress ought to make to boost the economy and employment here in the United States?
Well, I'm going to get back to what I said earlier with competitiveness, because I think the fundamental question on many people's mind, and I think on many business people's mind, and the business people are the ones that are going to make the investment in the private sector, is does our Congress have the capacity? Can it take the actions we need to restore competitiveness in our economy? So it's basically confidence that they can act. And so many of these issues, you just take the fiscal deficit. There's great understanding on both sides of the aisle. Erskine, Bowles, and Simpson, they gave us a great blueprint. Trust me, Democrats and Republicans understand it. The question is, can they come together and act? And will they? And so I would say, what I'd say to Congress is what I say all the time. In the short term, what we need is to take some of the uncertainties away. The uncertainty about this fiscal crisis, the uncertainty about taxes. And then, of course, over the longer term, you can't do it all at once. I mean, our system of government isn't designed to do things neatly and quickly, and it's a messy process at best. But over the longer term, I think people want to see them tackling these problems and making progress. And one of the lessons that I hope doesn't persist, that I took away from the financial crisis was it's very difficult to get Congress to act on something as big and difficult and controversial unless there's a crisis. Now, twice we got them to act before we had Armageddon, but it seems to take a crisis. And what Bowles Simpson, the other thing I say to people all the time is when you look at, and I actually don't think any plan is going to be perfect, but the Bowles Simpson plan was something that was workable and shows that if we spread sacrifice and act now and spread sacrifice through different sectors of the United States population, that we can make a big dent in solving the problem, and no one sacrifices too much. And so people say to me, well, if we don't act, when will the markets force it? And what I say to all the time to people is that I know with a certainty that the markets will force it if we don't act, and that it will be much more painful, and there'll be much more sacrifice. I can't tell you when the markets will force it. I think the reason the markets aren't forcing it is they know what the Bowles-Simpson plan showed. We're a wealthy nation. We have the ability to solve this. So it's only when it's pretty clear to the markets that we're not going to solve it that they will force it.
You mentioned Simpson-Bowles. The Congress had an opportunity. The president established that commission. The Congress had an opportunity to adopt it as a template. Do you think that's an example of what's wrong in the Congress today, that they're taking extreme positions and not finding a middle ground?
I would say it's what's wrong with the federal government. I wouldn't put it all on the Congress, okay? The president, let's just be honest, the president had a chance to lead. If the president had said, this is the majority, I had liberal Democrats like my senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin, coming together with more conservative Republicans. I had a majority of this. This was a chance for the nation to come together, and for the federal government to come together. So it takes leadership. It takes leadership from Congress, from the executive branch. It takes compromise, and I'd like to be encouraged that we'll get there. There's going to be some forcing events, coming up with the Bush
Little
tax.
thing called sequestration.
Yeah, right. Sequestration, debt ceiling, expiring tax cuts. So there'll be some things, and I don't want to be too negative, but I do think the major question. I think it's as much of a political and a leadership crisis as it is some economic problem that we're dealing with.
Now, you know a little bit about the Fed. They've done a good job at keeping inflation down. Do you think they have a dual responsibility to address unemployment? If they do, what could they do around that issue?
Well, again, Antonio will say this. When I worked very closely with Ben Bernanke. I'm a huge admirer. I'm a fan of his. We were in a foxhole together. And when I was Treasury Secretary, I never talked about monetary policy. As a former Treasury Secretary, I probably shouldn't, but I'll say a few things anyway. That I've been very supportive of what they've done to date. You can only rely on monetary policy to do so much, right? It only can do so much. A lot of it has to be done fiscally and with the Congress and the executive branch. But we're in a situation with our economy growing very slowly, and the executive branch, not acting. So I think that the Fed's got some difficult decisions, and I think that I have great confidence that Ben will make the right ones. But when people were worried about inflation a year or two ago, I just kept saying, what planet do they live on? That if I had 8 or 10 things to worry about, inflation wouldn't have been the first one right there when we looked at some of the problems we were facing as a nation and look at how far below capacity we are operating in a number of industries. And I still don't see inflation as being the major problem. I see growth as being an economic growth and competitiveness, but I don't think the Fed's going to be able to make that happen. I think it's going to take the executive branch, and let's make no doubt about it. There's low interest rates have got some real advantages to helping the economy grow, but they've got some disadvantages, right? Look what it does to savers. Look what it does to retired people, and who are again. So this is a tough issue, and the Fed's got a tough decision to make, and I'm quite confident Ben will make the right one.
You mentioned income inequality.
Yeah.
Share with me some ideas of what we could do to address that, particularly on the long term.
Well, I remember before I went to Washington, while I was still at Goldman Sachs, I went to some really outstanding economists, one who's currently the head of the Council of Economic Advisors when he was at Princeton, another at Yale, to study what was happening around the world. And what we saw was income inequality was a huge problem. You'd have to go back to the early 1900s to find a time when the top 1% or half of a percent had such a big percentage of the income in the U.S. And it was big problems in Latin America, in China, but different in the various countries. And as I look at it, I think that longer term, the policies to restore competitiveness, everything from fixing immigration, reform, to the tax system, to the pro-growth kinds of reforms. Because what competitiveness means is, our businesses are successfully competing with businesses all around the world, but we're doing it not by cutting wages, but with a rising standard of living. That's what competitiveness is. Now, one of the things that concerns me, and now I'm going to practice without a license because I'm not an expert.
We do that from time to time as well.
I'm not an expert on education, training, but I've got my view because I've looked at industry after industry during my business career and looked at technology and innovation, which we all know is good things. We can't be against that, but I see it destroying jobs. If it's engineering, if it's architecture, if it's in literally almost every in business, hollowing out all kinds of businesses. So you find people at the very top have better opportunities than they've ever had before, but there are many jobs that don't exist today. And so as I look at that, and it's really very troubling, and I worry when I look at history and I look at how we came back from the Great Depression. You know, we had World War II, we built up the manufacturing base, we had the GI Bill, but it was an easier move to get people to go from the farm to a manufacturing plant. Given what's happening today, I just think we're not debating the big issue. And I think education is huge, but skills training. And when I look at things that Germans do with some of their apprentice programs and skills training, I think we have to do more as a nation. We have to seriously consider universal service of some kind. It's a great privilege to be an American, and young people can afford almost anything other than not to learn and grow. And there's just so many young people that don't have jobs. And how we pay for this, how we structure this, you know, one thing I found in government, the government doesn't do a real good job of training. So how this happens. But so when I'm talking about some of the long-term structural issues we need to deal with, that's one of the ones I'm talking about, which is, you know, how do we get at income inequity?
You know, Hank, the Conference of Mayors and our Common Sense Jobs Agenda identified workforce development as an area that the federal government needs to focus on. And we did precisely for the reasons that you just stated. When you look at the job market and you see how many jobs, job vacancies there are that are unfilled because we don't have the skilled workers to meet the needs. And one of the things that we've said is that this should be a bipartisan issue. But workforce development was always bipartisan, and now it's become a political football.
Right. And the other thing I think that would make a difference is we need immigration reform, and we need it all at the high end and at the low end. But I will say this: when I look at the number of, we've got the best colleges, universities in the world, and you look at the foreign students that are coming here and getting advanced degrees, and they can't get a green card, and they're job creators, and they're going to go back home and because they're forced to, and create jobs there and start businesses there. So again, that's another area where we just got to come together.
You know, the Conference of Mayors, interestingly enough, I think virtually every year, comprehensive immigration reform comes up, and it's almost always on consent. We figured that one out a long time ago. The system's broken. We got to fix it. And Congress is missing in action when it comes to that.
Well, I'd say one thing, because speaking to this group, because when we talk about competitiveness in the federal government, and I know I'm saying this to a friendly audience, but I feel this very strongly, that mayors, are uniquely positioned. Because let's face it, you've got more power to do things than very senior people in the federal government. This is a group that is pragmatic. You're problem solvers. When you get close to the people and the issues, it's not ever very partisan. So it's about coming up with solutions. And as I think about it, the competitiveness issues can be done as part of this at the subnational level. when you're dealing with sort of unaffordable pensions, tax burdens, infrastructure, education, all those issues. And I think to the extent you keep getting things done at that level, it will help, that can build some momentum and maybe help show the way to the federal government.
Hank, you, the father, the creator, you certainly spearheaded the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Looking back, I mentioned, I believe, and believe strongly, that had you not done that, that this economy would have even gone further into a free fall. If, looking back, some of its strengths, some of its weaknesses.
Well, Antonio, first of all, I recognize when I left Washington, there was a poll, and it showed 92% of the Americans were against the TARP. In the same poll, 60% were against torture. So I know, and yet I look at it, and say it's one of the most successful programs ever implemented because it prevented a collapse of the economy. Now, Barney Frank explained to me at the time it was a no-win situation because you're never going to get credit for a catastrophe people don't see. You know, you can, but I look at it and the money that's been put out to the banks, more has come back already. When I look at that and the other things we did, I think they're very successful. But as I've thought about it, it's not that bad that it's unpopular because we, as an American people, we don't like bailouts. If people take risks and they make money, that's fine. But if they make losses, it's supposed to be their losses. And the thing that I was never able to do was convince the American people we didn't do this for the banks, we did it for them. And then it's criticized for other things. It's criticized because, gee, you should have been tougher with the banks. You know, you should have been tougher on compensation. You should have made them lend. And it's hard to explain to people that what we did was very unique. In the past, programs, when there are crises in Japan and in Sweden or in Europe, you know, the way the Europeans dealt with it, what they did was they nationalized failing banks just after they failed or on the verge of failing, like we did with Fannie and Freddie and AIG, for instance. But we didn't want to keep dealing with this serially. The banking system was undercapitalized, and so what we did acted, and we put capital into literally hundreds of banks, and we did it very, very quickly to restore confidence in the system and to stabilize the markets. So I look at, if I look at TARP and then look at the guarantee of the money markets, you know, we would have had $3.8 trillion of money markets, where Americans were thinking that was about as safe as a bank deposit implode, which would have taken down the corporate, the commercial paper market, and because we had AAA industrial companies having trouble selling commercial paper. We would have had small and middle-sized companies all around this nation going down if we hadn't done that. And so if you take a look at all the things we did together, what I would say is they worked, and when you're dealing with big, messy, ugly problems, trust me, there ain't no elegant, perfect solution. And you have to gauge doing something that's imperfect against not doing anything. And so it's key to act.
You know, you said something earlier about that you can't cut your way out of this problem, facing structural issues. You mentioned that we have to cut spending, but we also have to grow and focus on growth and stimulus. What are some things the Congress could do right now with respect to stimulus and growth?
I don't think there's going to be much they can do on stimulus or growth that would make a difference right now. I think the biggest thing that Congress can do is what I said before. Take some uncertainty off the table, show, and I think realistically you're talking about after the election. You know, it'd be nice if they did something before the election. But I think the markets, that would be a big upside if they did something before the election. The markets aren't counting on that. But after the election, whoever wins, you've got this Bush tax cuts expiring, you've got the defense sequester, you've got the debt ceiling. So showing you can work together, showing that there'll be, because I think American people, by and large, want compromise. And I guarantee you can't. I've thought about it a lot. And the kinds of fundamental reforms we need, it takes both parties coming together. You can't do it without the other. And so it's easier to do actually with divided government, because each side can blame the other for some of the things that they naturally have to do in order to get some important things done. And I think that's really where my focus is, and I think that's where most members of the private sector are looking. That will be a test.
You know, the deficit has been a big topic in the Beltway. It's certainly an issue of crisis proportions. If you, again, had a magic wand, your insights about what we should do with respect to the deficit and how we should do it?
Well, I really believe that although I might have done a few things differently, that I think Bowles Simpson was masterful. The way they threaded that needle, got people together, had the right amount of cutting, reform, because, as I said, there's got to be cutting, and I actually think you have to cut. It's not just the entitlements reform, which you really need reform. I think we have to do something with the defense budget. You know, we really do. The idea that that's untouchable in today's world. And believe me, I'm for a strong, a strong military, and I want to be strong. But remember, our strength starts with our economic strength. There's no example in history of any nation continue to be a great nation when they lose the strength of their economy. And so national security, just like economic security, starts with getting your arms around this debt. But we need the reason I think the deficit is so important to focus on is for that reason, and because you can't solve it without having pro-growth reform. A tax system. You know, I hear this debate all the time about taxes. You know, one side says if you just tax the rich, it's okay. The other side said we shouldn't have any taxes. And the fact is, we obviously need tax revenues. Of course we need tax revenues, but as I said before, we need a system, and no one says this system is a right system. Everyone knows it's a broken system. It's a discredit to our country. So we need a system that's going to let us be competitive, get the revenues we need, and create those jobs and have rising prosperity.
You know, last year, this conference took a position on the wars. And I said earlier in my speech that it was a very vigorous debate. We hadn't really taken a position since the Vietnam War. And I recall a couple of people getting up, and they were very eloquent because they said, this isn't a war resolution, this is a jobs resolution. And they talked about nation building and the need to build infrastructure, to make investments here in the country. When you hear you speak about Simpson-Bowles, which is a template for a middle ground to resolve the deficit and the debt, to address the need to cut spending, but also to reform our tax system, close tax loopholes, and provide the revenue that we need going forward. When you think about the role of mayors in that debate, share with us what you think we could and should be doing to really get the message of finding that middle ground?
Well, I think the first thing is what I said earlier, by example. I mean, what I see people doing, what I see you doing in LA, okay, doing things that are offending people on the left and on the right because you think it's proper. When you're saying there are retirement benefits that are just unaffordable, okay, we have to do something about it. We're not going to be competitive. When you look at schools and you say, wait a minute, unions have got an important role, but a union isn't to create a better product. That's to advocate for their members. So the teachers union isn't out there working to do a better job educating your kids, you know. And so we need reform there, and to take on some of these things and get them done. And mayors are close. I mean, I've lived in cities and I've watched. I'll tell you, if you have bad leadership, I've seen it go downhill just like that, okay? It doesn't happen as quickly at the federal level. And so the things that can be done to enhance competitiveness, and the things you do and other mayors do to promote exports, you know, or to make your city attractive for foreign investment to create jobs. So I think there's a fair amount. And then, of course, you all are leaders in your you know, Republican Party, Democratic Party, and I think you just need to make your voices heard and basically say, we need bipartisan action and reform at the federal level.
You know, I'm going to...
And also, one other thing, and also educating. You know, if I wanted to be cynical, I'd say that the American people want benefits they don't want to pay for. Now, I don't want to be that cynical, so I think they need to be educated. But all of us want, I mean, I want my kids and my grandchildren to have the same opportunities I have. But yet we're a selfish generation, because although we'd like it in our own family, my generation is being very selfish. And I think to make that point to the electorate, I think, is also an important thing.
Well, the courage to make that point. You know, it's funny because I think this happens to a number of us. You know, I've been at town halls where one of my colleagues on the council says and agrees with everything that all 300 people raise their hand and speak about. I'll get up there and I'll agree with them on 65, 70%, disagree with them, sometimes very vehemently, on 35 to 30%, and I'll get a standing ovation. And I tell my staff, you know, people are looking for authenticity. They want you to be straight with them. They don't want you to agree with them on everything. And when I was married, I used to say, you know, I've been married for 20 years and I don't agree with my wife on everything, and so why should I expect that you would, who don't even know me, would agree with me on everything? And I think you're absolutely right that in this room here are the people, through their actions, that could begin to change the debate. I mean, you mentioned something, Hank, that we're very proud of. Immigration reform, I mentioned. We took on that issue. The wars, the issue of education reform, infrastructure. On issue after issue that the Congress is stalemated on, we've acknowledged that there are two sides to the issue and that we've got to find a common and a middle ground. And one of them is Simpson-Bowles. Many of us have said publicly and privately that it's a template going forward. Now, you mentioned exports and foreign direct investment, which both of those issues are very, very important to us. But you know, virtually every one of these people have to explain that they came to this conference and that we're working on this conference on a city's behalf. When we go to China, as you and I did, when you look at 95% of the new markets are outside of the country, what do you say, if you were in a town hall, what do you say to the public who doesn't understand why we're traveling to promote our town? What do you say to them to explain the importance of these global connections?
Well, boy, I tell you, I sure wouldn't want to tell this group ought to do it, because one thing that I think I was unable to do during the financial crisis was convince the public why we were bailing out the banks. So I know it's a tough job to convince people, but I think the American people want to have the self-confidence to know we're open, and everyone understands jobs. So I've found that at the subnational level, mayors and governors are big allies when it comes to working on exports or working on investment. And I think you've got to make it real, and you've got to bring it down to jobs and how it impacts them. And I think exports are easier to understand. I know traveling overseas is tougher to explain, but I think you need to be able to point to some results. And you've got results. You, for instance, you opened a tourism office and you got the results. Okay, so I think this is about results. And in terms of investment, it is a lot easier to make the case when you've got people are against it in general, but when you've got a specific factory creating jobs, they're for it.
That's right. Why don't we open it up to mayors? We'll take a couple of questions, and then we'll wrap up. If there are a couple of questions from some of the mayors out there. There we go. Want to stand up and identify yourself?
Yes, Bob Sponge, City of Waukegan, Illinois, just north of Chicago.
Yep.
The question is...
You're talking to a native...
I used to, when I was at Barrington High School, I used to go there to wrestle.
And we beat you, I think, quite often.
You did, but not me.
Yeah. The question is access to capital for local medium and small-sized businesses. Waukegan's getting starved out. North Chicago, all of these communities are getting starved out because Chicago seems to really be getting most of the regional capital. We can't get our local banks to loan monies to businesses. What can cities do to help that? We don't seem to have any answers. Do you have any suggestions?
I tell you, that's a tough one, because when it comes down to investment, I think a lot of it that all cities can do is everything possible to make your city as competitive as it possibly can be, which means doing everything you can on the education and training front to make sure that there's a good labor pool there, having a sound fiscal situation. A little bit. Cities are also impacted by the state, and it helps a lot if you've got a state that's fiscally strong and well managed, and I think some of the cities in Illinois are doing better than the state. So I think that also makes your job a little bit more difficult. I think cutting through regulatory burdens, if one-stop shopping, if someone wants to start a business, helping cut through the regulatory side. But my own judgment today, and I could be wrong, is that there's plenty of money that banks have to loan, and the key is being comfortable that it's a bankable situation. But I don't have a magic bullet, but I think there are the obvious things that you're working on, I'm sure, already to make Waukegan a more attractive place to do business. I don't think there's much more you can do other than that.
One last question. Yes.
Andrew Kayak, Mayor, City San Jacinto, California. Secretary, with your institute, you really haven't disclosed too much about the China policy and your insight to where that's going to be going. We saw some changes with their economy recently and how that's going to impact us. As the mayor knows, the Port of LA and Long Beach and the rest of the U.S., a lot of our economy is hand in hand with China. Can you please share some insight with us on your understanding of that?
Yes. Well, China is a $7 trillion economy. The U.S. is roughly 14, Europe is roughly 16. So with troubles in 30 trillion, you can't have what's happening in Europe and the U.S. slow down, go on without it having a negative impact on China, number one. And number two, the Chinese, in 2009, they had a very aggressive stimulus program, which was, I think, net the right thing for them and for the world. But there were some bad after effects of that. It wasn't perfect. And so to combat inflation and their own real estate bubble, they put the clamps down on lending and instituted some administrative controls, and things slowed down pretty markedly. They've removed those now, and they're doing some very positive things. So my own view is, although the Chinese economy is slowing down, I believe you're going to see it continue to grow at around the 8% level. I don't know that, but I sure think it will. And I think their bigger challenges are a few years down the road, because they need to also, keep reforming and making changes, because their growth model is starting to have diminishing returns. They're too big a country to be as reliant as they have been on exports. And so they're doing things to increase consumption, raising wages and so on, the sorts of things that Antonio pointed to that makes that such an attractive export market over time for the U.S. So net, they've slowed down, but I think they'll weather this. And you're very right in saying that for those who root against China should be careful what they're rooting for, because our problems are of our own making, and they'll all be more difficult to solve if China has problems.
Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Hank Paulson.
Thank you.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. I enjoyed that. And again, thank you very much, Hank. And for those of you who don't know, next year, hopefully next April or so, in Los Angeles, we'll have a U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting with Chinese mayors across the country. We signed a memorandum of understanding in December, and to make that happen, and we certainly expect and hope that Secretary Paulson will be with us there. Now, while we reset for our next panel, we'll hear an update from one of our partners. For the last 11 years, DuPont has had a platinum partnership with the Conference of Mayors called Cities United for Science Progress, or CUSP. Partnership promotes science and engineering solutions in our cities and our schools. I'd like to introduce a good friend of the conference, DuPont Public Affairs Manager, Mary Kate Campbell, to give us an update.
Thank you, Mayor Virgosa. As we enter our second decade of partnership with the USCM, it's my pleasure to update you on our partnership. For the past 11 years, we've invested more than $5 million in numerous resources to help make cities safer, smarter, and healthier. From science education to safety to state-of-the-art gear for our first responders, we've been proud to partner with you for the betterment of our cities. So I'd like to briefly remind you of the programs that we offer through our partnership and encourage you to take advantage of them. With our Science in the School Day program, the USCM and DuPont have reached some 40,000 students in 175 cities and 450 schools, showing them what it's like to be an engineer for the day. In cities large and small, we pair the mayor with DuPont's best and brightest to learn about science and engineering concepts. Why? Because we believe that if we get young students excited about science and engineering early, not only will DuPont become a better company, but it will help close the skills gap that is so critical to American competitiveness. And we have found no better partner than our mayors to help impact our school children and our communities. This year, we are working to expand our offerings in this area to reach out to science educators. By broadening that reach to include opportunities for middle and high school science teachers, we hope to have a greater impact on science education and ultimately reach more students. So DuPont will offer science teachers access to national programs that will help them find new and inventive ways to make math and science fun and interesting. To that end, we'll sponsor teachers to attend exciting events such as the National Science Teachers Association Conference. That's kind of like the Oscars for science education, and it will be held in San Antonio, Texas next year. And a new program called Driving Science, a professional development institute sponsored by DuPont Motorsports, Daytona International Speedway, and Clemson University, where teams of teachers will work to strengthen content knowledge in STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, disciplines, and then take them back to their classrooms. You'll be hearing more about these programs throughout the year and at the winter meeting. And DuPont is also committed to protecting the people who protect us, law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders. Turnout gear and bullet-resistant vests made with Kevlar and Nomex provide state-of-the-art protection for those who bravely put their lives at risk for others. As part of our partnership, we will continue to work with mayors to identify opportunities to bring our WARE trial programs to your city. When you express interest in this program, I ask that you also please let us know the name of the person in the city who is responsible for procurement of this kind of gear. When we offer the program, we do need to work through your existing channels, so if we know who to contact within your administration from the outset, it will help us bring the program to your city more quickly and allow your responders to begin experiencing the benefits that our technologies offer. If you're interested in any of these programs, I'll be here for the rest of the meeting. We also have a website or an email address, scienceintheschoolday@verizon.net. Or, as I said, just stop me at one of the events throughout the rest of the meeting. We look forward to continuing to work with you and appreciate you having us here at the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary Kate, and not just for those words, but most importantly for your platinum partnership with our Conference of Mayors, for your efforts to promote science and engineering. Very, very important. Now, I want to continue the conversation on the 2012 presidential campaign. I don't have to tell you what's at stake for America's cities in November. Made it very clear that our priorities for this election are job creation and infrastructure investment. But so far, these issues have taken a back seat in the national political debate. I've invited 3 national political experts, and I'm looking to my left, and I see a couple of them. And we invited them to help us understand where the race is going as we head toward November and what issues will be central to the campaigns. Now, I'm delighted that we have with us a woman I have admired for many, many years, the Democratic National Committee's Vice Chair of Voter Registration and Participation, the former chair of its Voting Rights Institute, Donna Brazil. Now, Ms. Brazil has worked on a wide range of political campaigns. She cut her teeth on a city council campaign. She was Al Gore's campaign manager during his presidential bid in 2000, and I campaigned all over the country for him. And Ms. Brazil is a columnist as well as an on-air contributor to CNN, NPR, and ABC, where she's often featured on This Week. I'm also very pleased that we have with us today Kevin Madden, a key spokesman and communication strategist for the Romney campaign. I'm sure many of you recognize him from his appearances for the Romney campaign on programs like Meet the Press. Mr. Madden was Mitt Romney's chief spokesman and top media strategist back in 2008. She's going to get me. She says, I came here after knee surgery. That's why you call on your friends, right? Now, prior to that, he served as national spokesman for the Speaker Boehner, President Bush, and the Department of Justice. And we are most fortunate to have as our moderator today Scott Montgomery, the editor of Roll Call, one of the preeminent newspapers of Capitol Hill. And Mr. Montgomery has been covering politics and campaigns for over 2 decades. He looks like he's 19. and was a member of the St. Petersburg Times Pulitzer Prize-winning team during the election of 2008. Each of these three individuals has played a unique role in our recent elections. They all know how high the stakes are this year. As political experts, I know they'll lead an engaging and informative conversation. Let me now turn over the session to Scott Montgomery.
Thank you very much. Are we mic'd up right? Is everybody, can you hear us okay?
I'm from New York, so they're going to hear me no matter what, even if the mic's not on. So.
Okay, well, I just want to say quickly, we are going to, we had some conversations earlier, and we're going to turn to you folks sooner rather than later in this conversation. We'd like to hear from you, hear you ask some questions as well. But I'll go ahead and get things started, poke at them a little bit, and see if we can have a little fun. So I'd like to start with a topic that's been in the news, very specifically made news about a week ago.
You must have some training from CNN. Actually, for men, if you put it up, that tie is even better.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
You know, women can lean into the mic. You guys can't seem to move very well. That's better.
See, now I feel all this pressure to start moving.
It's coming.
Prove her wrong.
It's coming.
Is that better? So now I can go right or I can go left.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just don't get gridlocked up here. With a bad knee, I couldn't help you, baby.
Okay.
See, I thought the cane was here to beat me over the head.
No, sugar. I would need something harder. To knock sense into a Republican these days, I would need a bulldozer.
You don't need me.
You're welcome to stay. After all this Florida, no matter what I say, I can't win.
All right, so let's, I was going to say let's get started, but we already have. In the news a little less than a week ago, President Obama used the fateful words, "The private sector is doing just fine." And so I know that that's still in the news because Mitt Romney just was talking about it again yesterday. So what I wanted to do is quickly read the whole quote from President Obama and then ask a question. The whole quote is, "We've created 4.3 million jobs over the past 27 months. The private sector is doing fine. We're seeing local weakness in our economy have to do with state and local government oftentimes cuts, we're seeing weaknesses in our economy have to do with state and local government, oftentimes cuts initiated by, governors and mayors who are not getting the kind of help that they've had in the past from the federal government and don't have the same kind of flexibility of the federal government to deal with fewer revenues coming in." So my opening question is, fair point, or is he off the mark?
Who you want to start with, the Republican? I'll let you go.
Well, look, I think where Donna and I will disagree on a lot, but I think on this particular framework of the 2012 debate, we agree on one thing, that this is going to be an election that has pretty clear contrast. And I think the clear contrast really emerged in that quote. I don't believe it was a gaffe. I think a lot of people tried to frame it as one. I think that's that statement that the president made is one that he truly believes in. And I think what was wrong with it was, of course, the front part of it was saying that the economy is fine, or that the private sector is doing fine at a time where people feel that not only is the country going in the wrong direction, but they have very conflicted feelings about the future and what it's going to look like economically. And I think the other part of it was philosophical, which is that that President Obama basically stated that he believes that the way that you create a growing economy is that you put more dollars into hiring government workers. Now, I think all the folks in this room who deal with the daily budget pressures and have to deal with a lot of their the growing budget concerns that they have as it relates to city workers and pensions and things like that, they recognize that the best way to have their budgets grow is to have a sustained growth in the economy, and that oftentimes when the federal government and I think this is, again, that philosophical difference that we have between parties, and in this case between candidates, that the federal government writes a check to states and localities that they then use to hire workers. If we don't have the fundamental systemic economic growth, that they're going to be coming back in a year or 2 years when that money runs out, and that you're going to, again, have another budget shortfall. And so I think that's a difference that's going to be litigated right now in this campaign, and I think it's one that particularly is troublesome for the president, given that his message right now is to tell the American, in that instance, was to tell the American public that the private sector is doing fine at a time where the public doesn't feel that.
Well, I don't disagree with the notion that the public is not feeling the slight and modest growth that we've seen in the economy over the last 5 years. What's interesting is that over the last couple of years, we have seen the Dow is up, 85%, S&P up, corporate profits after taxes, 68%. That's record, that's good. Corporate liabilities, taxes been down. Overall, taxes have been down. Government spending at the federal level, down. We know that corporations are holding about $2 trillion on the sideline due to uncertainty. Don't know what the taxes might be 6 months from now. But I don't think the president was wrong in at least saying that some of the sectors in our economy since the Great Recession, some of those sectors are healing, that we have seen some rebounds in parts of our society, in parts of our region, and there's nothing wrong with saying what's working. I mean, after all, we've had 5 years of nonstop blues. I'm from Louisiana. I love the blues. But at some point, you have to jazz things up, and you got to let the American people, who after all, consumers drive our economy, 70% of our economy is driven by consumer spending, they need to know things are looking brighter, better. Over 4 million private sector jobs, manufacturing jobs coming back. In fact, we now have in some areas of our society jobs that once were shipped offshore coming back onshore. While corporations are looking for ways to even cut spending more, they're bringing those jobs back here. So was the president absolutely wrong in phrasing it the way that gave the Republicans a talking point for the weekend? Perhaps. I mean, I'm on TV. We use talking points. We like gaffes. We love to make simplistic things blow out of proportion so that we can keep people tuned in. But it was another one of those superficial conversations that we're having when we really should be having a serious conversation about how we get things moving and growing in our economy long term. I don't know about you all, but I'm 52. And so while I may not look my age, I definitely act my age. And we've had a conversation about Bush tax cuts for the last 11 years. Every time we extend them, then we have to spend 2 years talking about, well, do we extend them again? Do we raise them again? Do we lower them? At some point, we got to get off of just talking about all of these uncertainties and start talking about what are the solutions. And that's why we have the highway bill that would put tens of thousands of Americans back to work. That's lagging now in conference committee because everybody's trying to figure out what's to pay for. How do we solve the problems? Let me tell you this. When Barbara Boxer and James Inhofe walked down the aisle with a bill that said, this is it, you take that marriage proposal and you go straight to the honeymoon. And that's what worries me. We're sitting down here being stupid when we should be focusing on getting the American people back to work.
Well, I would like to first personally thank you for setting up my next question so well.
Pay me your salary too. I have pockets.
Now, my question is going to be about Congress. As you said, we have a transportation bill that last reading I get is that it's still not moving, right? We've got an ag bill that is also stuck. I mean, there's a long, long list of things that have been that are stuck. And invariably, they are all stuck in kind of the same place, which is basically an intractable conversation about ideological discussions of government, and which is going to be a theme as we continue to talk today. But the question that I have for you both Congress, in having these fights, has, the lowest approval rating it's maybe ever had. They look incapable. And so the question that I have for both of you is, what is the candidate's role, the presidential candidate's role in this whole conversation? Should they be playing more off of what Congress does? Should they be throwing them under the bus?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think what's missing is a executive office right now with an ability to forge consensus. And I'm not saying that in a partisan way against the president. I think it's more of a clinical diagnosis of what's missing up on Capitol Hill. I think President Obama had an extraordinary opportunity when he came into office with 70% approval rating, and he talked about, and he was essentially came into office with prose and poetry that was very much of a centrist kind, and bringing people together, and he had very much mastered the art and the pageantry of bipartisanship, but very quickly had problems with the practice of it. During the stimulus debate, when the president really had an enormous opportunity to take both the public sentiment that he had behind his historical election and sort of bring it and use it transactionally to create a great deal of goodwill up on Capitol Hill and to use it against some legislative opponents. He went down to the Williamsburg Democrat retreat and lambasted the Republicans that were disagreeing with him on the stimulus. And that sent a message, and it sent a very stark message to a lot of the Republicans that I work with up on Capitol Hill, that what you saw was pure pageantry. He was not really interested in bipartisanship. And so I think one of the things right now that you're looking at on Capitol Hill, the dynamic, it is pretty tough. It is, folks up there are entirely focused on where they disagree. There's really a hard time right now there's not the political will, and I think given that you also have you have calcified divisions in the public, there's not a whole lot of movement that they see where they can find some of the political will to actually start to put some bipartisan consensus together. So I think that the candidates, and I'll look at this clinically, candidates running for president have an enormous opportunity to affect that public stalemate right now, to build a big degree of consensus behind the public, and then use it against another legislative body that is going to fear that political capital at some point.
Well, I spent a lot of my political career on Capitol Hill, and let me tell you, they're as popular as a root canal right now. I wouldn't write home about Congress right now, but I wouldn't throw them down the tubes just yet. I sit back I was home for a week, so I didn't watch soap operas because I cannot, do this As the World Turned While the Young and the Restless, Searching for Tomorrow thing. And I don't watch nothing at nighttime unless it's CNN because it's all sex and violence, and if I need that, I just watch CNN anyway. So I really had time to take a look at what was going on Capitol Hill, and the news is not all that bad. We always try to portray people in the most negative light. And I don't spend a lot of my personal or my professional time looking for blemishes and acne and other problems with people because we all have it. So they extended the payroll tax cut and unemployment benefits. They passed a bipartisan bill to make it easier for small businesses to raise capital. Export-Import Bank got back on track. But look, let's not make the other side totally look bad, because I can speak like Senator Reid last week, who said, you guys are using Orwellian strategy to keep us tied up in knots and filibuster us until, to the next decade. The defense authorization bill is on track. It's moving slowly. The measures to fund FDA, that's on track. The transportation and farm bill, that's where we really get into the minutia. Let's forget about, the appropriation, because we're going to have a continuing resolution for the rest of our adult lives. But defense authorization, if they move that, and then if they settle on this student loan and cap the rate cut, and pass the violence against women, we might have a productive session of Congress. So we shouldn't throw them totally off to the sideline. Now, the farm bill, I like the farm bill because, see, this is when I can really use my expertise as a cook. The farm bill it's about cotton, which as a black woman, I don't talk about a lot. We've had a lot of that in our history. That's not a subject matter I talk a lot, but it's really about rice and peanuts. That's the South. And they're up against the corn and soybean crowd from the Midwest. Now, if we can solve those subsidies and those issues, we might get a farm bill because the farm bill has about a $23 billion deficit reduction. So we might get the farm bill. So that leaves us clearly with the transportation bill. I keep coming back to the transportation bill because when I worked on Capitol Hill, that was one of the subcommittees that my boss assigned me to, and thank God for Dick Gephardt and Eleanor Holmes Norton. They just didn't assign me to, the agriculture committee where I could talk about food all day, but I actually talked about roads and bridges and aviation and repairing our ailing infrastructure. That is a bill that we should put the bulk of our focus. And here's the problem. The clock is ticking. We have 40 legislative days, and Kevin and I both know 40 legislative days is not the time that Moses spent in the desert wandering about. Had he talked to his wife, he would have gotten quicker, as you all know. 40 legislative days, clearly, they're not what they used to be back when both of us were on the Hill.
Yeah.
They have so many abbreviated sessions, and I'm like, why are they so abbreviated? Because they come in for like less than 50 hours. So 40 legislative days between now and November, and they got a lot of these bills that they got to get through. So I think we should, rather than just start pointing fingers and say, well, if the president just have more beer summits, more hot dogs, and if Mitt Romney, whatever. I don't know if he doesn't drink beer, and I don't know if he eats pork. So I have no idea about Mitt Romney. We don't know that yet about Mitt Romney. But
nothing like a nice glass of cold ice water to get a deal done.
hell, if I'm having a cold glass of ice water, something on the side, it's going to look close to my skin color. I guarantee you that. But let's forget the fact that we need the presidential candidates. What we really need is Congress to get out of their election year zone and get some of these things off the books, get them done, and then go out there and rabble-rouse with the American people. Look, at the end of the day, if they don't talk about creating jobs, and then they can always go back to talking about sex. And you know what I often say? I've had more conversations about sex on TV. Okay, get the sentence written out. Then you actually have time to go out there and do anything, because we keep talking about birth control, and then we get into marriage stuff. All I'm saying is that we need to focus like a laser beam on the transportation bill, on jobs, and bringing our construction industry back to the pre-recession level so that people can go back to work. Then we can talk about sex.
Well, I wanted to just follow. I remember back, it was the spring, late spring, I guess it was, of 2000. George W. Bush is running. He's, at that point, the presumptive nominee. Republicans ran the House, and they were working on their budget. John Kasich actually was the budget chair then. And George W. Bush said something that became really sort of a pivotal moment in his campaign when he said, I don't want Congress to balance the budget on the backs of the poor. And it really was, sort of, we look back now, the launch of compassionate conservatism,
right,
and how he campaigned on it. But it was also him really stepping out and saying, the party's mine now, and this is what we're going to be about. And I'm wondering if Mitt Romney, A, needs to do the same thing, and B, if so, how?
If he needs to go out and say the party's mine now, well, I think this is a party that has gone through a very important transition phase since we lost in 2008, and then you saw the successive rise of the Tea Party element within the party, and then the 2010 elections, which many found as an affirmation of some of the reform elements that the Tea Party brought forward. And I think that we're still very much a party that is growing from the bottom up, which is very different for Republicans. Republicans used to be, and I think this happened with a lot of party apparatus, was that it used to be very much from the top down. It was, well, the party chairman said this, and this is what we're going to do, and we decided to go with this candidate, and he's been endorsed by the executive committee, and get used to it, because we're going to tell all the fundraisers to give the money to him, and that's just the way it is. We're going to turn the spigot off. And then here we go now with technology and with a lot more of an emphasis on grassroots growth within both parties. We're seeing that folks are beginning to manage these parties from the bottom up. And I think that's something that we're very cognizant of in this campaign. And as we went out and litigated our arguments throughout the primary process, we went and we competed very vigorously against other candidates. And you see very strong governors across the country, and you see very strong mayors that are playing a prominent role in the Republican Party leadership. And we're working in unison with them versus telling everybody, this is Mitt Romney's party, this is Mitt Romney's idea, everybody get along and do likewise. And instead, it's a much more collaborative process. So I think what we have to do is synchronize the ideas. Where the party went wrong in 2008 was and I remember going through vast discussions, and we did a lot of data presentations, and we looked at both the empirical evidence and the anecdotal evidence from voters that said, the party's no longer the party of ideas. They're not the party of reform. And we'd lost our way with infrastructure. We hadn't really built the grassroots the way that the Democrats had in that campaign. The way President Obama and Hillary Clinton's contest really worked to energize a lot of new voters, bring people into the fold. And so Governor Romney thought, well, there's three things I want to do. I want to focus on helping individual candidates around the country. I want to focus on building this campaign and the party around ideas, and I want to do it in a collaborative way. And I think that's something that he's done, and as a result, we haven't gone and said, okay, this is our party now, everybody else is wrong, and started to sort of pick people off. Instead, we're bringing people in, and we want it to be a collaborative process of growing the party together.
I think they're running a textbook campaign. When you're faced with a popular incumbent, they basically sit around and wait for mistakes on the other side and jump on them. So that's the campaign I see. I don't see a campaign.
You just described every campaign that ever existed.
Well, that's what I told you. It's a textbook campaign.
Yeah.
I teach, so it's a textbook. There's no vision. There's no road to really economic recovery. There's nothing that says to the American people, I'm going to bring the common sense solutions that pull this country back together, that makes us competitive in the world economy, that gives America a competitive age in the future, that educate our children, and that treat everybody the same, whether you're born in the projects or you came into wealth by some inheritance. So that being what it is, it's going to be a very close campaign because it's about competing visions of where we take the country in the 21st century. President Obama came in, and George Bush had every pot on the burner. The wars, okay, we had a recession, a slowing economy, and what President Obama basically did was he kept the pots going. He didn't immediately withdraw our troops from Iraq or stop the war in Afghanistan. He said, I will slowly and responsibly end those wars. That's what he did. On the economic side, the president said, well, we've had 2 stimulus, which is a combination of tax cuts and help to state and local governments. So as you all know the math, because you implemented a lot of this, you saw what that stimulus did. For a time being, it gave us a little growth, gave us a lot of hope, and of course, things got better from a 750,000 loss per month in jobs to 150,000 created each month, albeit not as good, not good enough. And of course, right now, the worry, given the crisis in Europe, I just bought some more Greek wine. I hope that helps. Given the crisis in Europe and some of the other uncertainties, that economic spiral is slowing down. There are the other 2 burners, the loss of revenue during the recession. I mean, that's not a rocket scientist, that's math. So, and the 4th burner. And the 4th burner is I think, the most important burner. And that is getting Congress to essentially do its job so that the American people can, of course, get back to work. And we all know that Congress has basically, things have gotten so bad at times on Capitol Hill that C-SPAN has run out of classical music to play. So you got these 4 burners. And I think he's been a great chef. Now, has he always communicated his values? Because I think values determine actions, and actions bring about results. No, he hasn't been the best of communicators. And I can give him a bad score on that point. But in terms of the results of the economy out of what I call the ditch in the slow lane. We're not going 55, but we're damn sure not going 20. But we need to figure out how we can continue to wind down the operation in Afghanistan, bring our troops home safely, responsibly. We know that with the sequester that we're going to have some budgetary constraints. And then we got to figure out how to get the private sector working with the government to create these jobs of the 21st century. Now, I attended 10 Republican debates. I bought the best red suits I could find. I wanted to make sure that Sarah Palin would never be missed. When they looked at me, they thought, Sarah Palin, as you all know, wink, I could see Cuba from the levees of New Orleans. Truth of the matter is, I wanted to go to those Republican debates not because that was the best use of my time, but I was I'm so glad that I went on behalf of CNN ABC because I learned a great deal. I understand the principles that the Republicans support. And I think Mitt Romney tailored his programs to fit those principles. Small government, less taxes, etc. We know I've heard the song. I may not do the dance, but I know the song. Mitt Romney was the best of the best. It was a weak field. He emerged. He emerged victorious. And the question is now that he has those principles. Those are the guiding principles of the Republican Party. And the guiding principles of the Democratic Party is one of shared prosperity for all Americans. We believe that the American dream should not be limited based on your zip code. And I think President Obama is going to have to get into our face. If, he's not like, he's much more charming than I am. But he's going to have to tell us where he wants to take us the next 4 years. I think the American people get the 4 burners, but they don't know where he wants to take us. And they're afraid what might be in the oven might spill over again. So that is the real question of this election. Will we renew his contract, or will we hire Mr. Romney? And I hope President Obama, and I do believe at the end of the day he will convince the American people to renew his contract because he's been good at stirring up all of the mess and getting it cleaned up and fixing it so things can improve. And I just filibustered.
Real quick, I think candidates are always criticized when they go out and they offer sort of the broad sweeps of policy, and everybody says, and oftentimes pundits and reporters say, well, there's no specifics. Well, Governor Romney, Donna alluded to the fact that Governor Romney doesn't have any vision, and that hasn't presented a campaign. I couldn't disagree with that more. Governor Romney actually put out a 160-page booklet with 59 points about what he would do. The ads that he ran from the very beginning, unlike President Obama's ads, they weren't negative. It was about day one, job one, what he would do to focus on the economy. And if you look at it, it goes industry by industry, sector by sector, what he would do on healthcare, what he would do on energy, what he would do with manufacturing, how he would help spur greater economic growth across the spectrum of the American economy and up and down income levels. And I think the one thing I would ask everybody to look at during this campaign, and this is just to Donna's point, this is like the third or fourth time in like the last 2 weeks where I've heard a major national Democrat implore the president to talk about where he wants to take the country. They don't know. He hasn't made that point. He has not made that case, and I think that's why you see someone like James Carville put pen to pad. If they're putting that pen to pad, I would love to eavesdrop on the conference calls about what they're saying when they're not in public. Because I think it's a pretty dramatic thing to have national Democrats say, he needs to tell us where he's taking the country because the American public doesn't know. Our campaign, Governor Romney's campaign, I would ask you to focus on this. It's going to be about very big things, the direction of the country, whether or not you put your faith in the American people and entrepreneurs and the private sector, or whether you put it in government. Now, we all have different philosophical agreements on which one we would choose, but that's going to be the nature of the debate that Governor Romney wants to prosecute during this campaign. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, and I think as you look at the dynamics and how it affects in cities and towns and counties and states across the country, it'll be interesting to see how the American people react to that debate.
I do think, just in full disclosure, you got to know 2 things about Democrats since you don't really spend a lot of time with us.
Oh, I spend a lot of time
with that whenever there's a sharpening in the polls, when things get, Democrats, they don't like things to get close. We don't like to be close to Republicans. So we like to have a lead. They have a little moment of panic. Some people call it bedwetting. I would never do that. But there's a little panic going on. You see, my waters are calm and cool. I mean, politics is, as you all know, a noble art, but Poland is like those boats in the Venice Canal. They're pole-driven, but not useful in rough waters. And so the waters are rough because there's a significant headwind. And I think the president has to paint the picture that ultimately we all understand how to move this country forward. We do. I think if I sat here with 5 mayors, and I talk to mayors all the time, but you all know what moves your economy at the local and state level. The same thing that helps move our economy at the federal level. We know that 40% of our exports, our exports coming out of many of our major cities, that's going to drive economic growth in many of these wonderful cities across America. We're dependent on it in New Orleans. I know they're dependent on it in Miami. They're dependent on it in Los Angeles and everywhere else. We know what's going to drive the economy of the 21st century. We're going to have a stronger, more skilled, highly skilled workforce to compete with students in India and in China and a country named after my family, Brazil. So it's important that we get this straight, but that we have a leader in the White House who see the whole picture. That's what a vision is. The Bible said vision is important, because without a vision, a people will perish. And people are disgruntled now because they don't see it. And that is my criticism, that they have to see it in order to seize it. And I think President Obama has to do a better job of laying it out so that people can see it. I see it, but I'm not paid to be president, just a pundit.
So let me shift gears just a little bit and ask, setting aside, which is a big set aside, economic issues, what do you think will be another breakthrough issue? Is there something else out there that you think, aside from the economy, that you think could play a significant role in the debate going forward and be influential in the end?
Well, I think oftentimes the one thing that we forget is that campaigns are as much as folks like Donna and I that have worked on these campaigns, we try to control everything. The best political operatives are control freaks. They want to control everything. A lot of it's out of your control. And I think one thing to watch in this campaign is whether or not a national security event drives public opinion or then starts to reset the lens that a lot of voters see this campaign through. Now, that could happen, maybe not a national security event, but a broader umbrella of a foreign policy event, and that could fall through with what happens with the debt conflagration that we're seeing out of Europe. Does that become a foreign policy lens that people begin to see things through? Things with Iran and Israel and some of the tensions in the Middle East, Syria, do things there start to bubble up to the point where, again, this starts to shift through a foreign policy lens, and then they begin to judge the candidates through that, and that could alter the dynamic. But I still believe, baked into the cake, given the fact that we're sitting here in June 2012, is people's economic, their self-interest as it relates to the economy.
Conservatives measure President Obama against their fears, liberals against their hopes. And so the uncertainty is how scared the Republicans will be and how hopeful the Democrats. If the Democrats are hopeful, and I agree with Kevin, there are so many things that are out of our control. It's like paranormal activity. You know it's going on, you just don't know how to control it. And I'm telling you, I'm from New Orleans. We know paranormal activity. Nobody dies. They just go somewhere else and they come back the next day and you're like, hell, I thought you were dead. Bills start creeping up and you want to divorce him. You say, I thought you were dead. But I do believe at the end of the day, it's really going to come down, as Kevin alluded to, the economy, because people are really worried. When I say conservatives against their fears, liberals their hope, the American people is their pocketbook. It's what's on their table. It's what's in their wallet. And that's going to drive turnout. That's going to drive the conversation. But there are so many unforeseen events overseas that we have to constantly pay attention to, including the G20, G8. Why do they keep calling it like G something? Is that great? What the G stand for?
Group of.
Group of. That's some crazy stuff. Sound like a game. That's why they call them games too. But we're going to see what happens in Mexico next week, and maybe that might stabilize Europe. We got the elections this weekend in Greece. But I'm always looking further into the world. beyond the Middle East into Asia, because, you know, I'm watching China. That's what I'm watching.
Yeah.
Now, one of the sort of truisms, I guess, of politics is that in difficult economic times, social issues are sort of take a back seat because presumably voters can't afford to be concerned about whether it's gay marriage or it's
Have you been
abortion or
watching
whatever.
TV?
Well, that's what I wanted to say. That seems not to be the case here.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on here? I mean, are we reaching a level of, for lack of a better word, maturity on these issues that they're
Yeah, well,
about
I think and oftentimes in a party, everybody sort of tries to relitigate the last statement that was given and whether or not everybody is as far or is in perfect alignment with the party platform and has always been. And that tends to be in the primary. And so we argue about the differences on social issues where we largely agree, because then we get into a general election, we start to talk about where we agree and how we contrast ourselves. And there are very distinct contrasts, I think, between the parties on some of those social issues. But right now, and I felt like this was something that happened even in our primary, was that the candidate that flourished during the Republican primary was the one that did two things. Focused the most on the economy and issues related to people's greatest anxieties, debt and spending, I think, at that time. And the person who offered the most compelling argument against President Obama about why they were better than President Obama, or just offered the most stinging criticism of President Obama, given our base's unhappiness with him. And that even when we were talking about social issues, it did sometimes, it did seem to be a distraction. I think the public at large right now is much more concerned about pocketbook issues, and that not that they don't care about those particular issues and that those aren't important issues, and that they believe that sometimes you often have to defend the so-called soul of a party, but instead that the greatest anxiety they have has more to do with the discussions that they're having at the kitchen table related to their budget and their bottom line, and that everything else seemed to be, it just wasn't addressing their core concern.
You know, some people call them social issues, some people call them wedge issue. For me, it's an issue of quality of life, human dignity. It's about equality in our society. And it's a very sad thing that you cannot explain any of these issues without putting a partisan frame on it. I mean, just last week I got $154.88 back from my health care provider. I'm like, ooh, 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 ooh. And you know, when I cashed the check, I wanted them ones because I couldn't believe I got money back. And the reason why, because, you know, I called them because I thought they made a mistake, and I didn't want to cash a check and then be accused of fraud. So I said, why am I getting money back? Because when I had my annual physical, they said that that's no longer a pre-existing condition and that I didn't have to pay for it. I said, baby, I can go to Walmart and get 4 bras at this price. I mean, seriously, y'all. I mean, can you imagine that finally I am not discriminated against because I'm a woman? My health care provider, Blue Cross Blue Shield, is now treating me like I'm a human being with just different biological tools than my brothers up here. I mean, so that's a big social divide in our country. It's because we've made every little issue to be so, you know, toxic that you cannot even have a conversation. When I talk about birth control, marriage equality, all of these issues, they help to turn out the base of the election. It gives the extreme wings of both of our political parties, respective parties, something to crow about, something to fight about. You know, every time I get one of those emails from a fellow Catholic that I'm a baby killer, I say, you want to see how much tuition I paid over the last 20 years of my life, having not one biological child, but putting hundreds of kids through Catholic school because of my commitment, not just to my faith, but the values that I learned as being a Catholic. No, they don't want to have that conversation. And it comes from men who wants to tell me I'm a baby killer. But that's all good. People love to talk about these conversations. These are drivers. They're not game changers. It will drive turnout on both sides, these hotly contested issues. Look, we're not going to resolve none of these issues in our lifetime. But I'm glad that we've made progress on some of these issues, especially marriage equality. perhaps one day, 20 years from now, when I'm really using a cane, we will not be having this conversation. We'll be talking about the quality of the air we're breathing and the water that we're drinking, something that we all should agree on as well, but we don't.
Before time gets away from us,
Where do you have to go?
I don't have actually, I'm more concerned about your schedule. I would like to go ahead and see if we can get the lights up and get the microphone out and see if there are people who
You can't see these people? They're glowing. These are the worker bees of our economy, state and local workers. As you can tell, my start at the local level. I'm a product of local government. God bless you all.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Being a mayor and here with a lot of my colleagues, Mayor of Racine, Wisconsin, John Dickert, best tasting water in the country. Come on down. Being in politics for over 30 years, God bless you guys. I love you. I watch you every Sunday, but I'm not going to ask you the question because I already know the answer I'm going to get. So I'm going to ask this gentleman a question. This group, I would argue, probably has the best and most positive rating of any politicians in the country. And there's a reason. We're on the ground. And as you move up to the state and the federal level, who's farther away from the ground, you know the numbers go down. I think that's because people don't think, and for the most part we know, you're not listening. So while we appreciate everything that you're saying, we just aren't hearing you anymore because you keep talking about insider politics, and candidly, we've all heard it from you before, and oftentimes it's not a vision, it's a path. We've been down it, and we don't like it. So I'm going to ask you, sir, outside of throwing everybody out of Congress who just doesn't get anything done, sits up there and fights politics the way they've been doing it for the last 10 years, and never helps the people down here who are actually doing the day-to-day activities, outside of throwing them all out, is there anything that's going to change what's going on up in the Hill?
So we'll start with an easy question. That is a great question. You know, the truth is that we really have to, I would say, sort of rethink how we do our election process, in the sense that when you go to, we just went through redistricting, and redistricting is a great example of this very thing, of the struggle that goes on at the national level. The fact is, it looks like a big chessboard from Washington, you know, and it's tweaking a line here and tweaking a line there, and the goal is to set up your opponents so that they have to defend as many seats as you can make them defend, and put yourself on offense in as many places as you can. You know, it's a war of attrition. If we can make them spend money in, you know, Wisconsin 5, even though they shouldn't have to, then even if we don't win the seat, that's good for us, because then in Florida we'll end up picking up something. And so I would argue that one of the things you'd have to really overhaul the system and say, you know, we're going to go to, you know, county level, you know, districting, so that the lines are no longer in dispute, so that you don't have situations where you really are building partisanship into the makeup of the legislature. Can you do that? I don't know. I mean, they do that in Iowa, right? I mean, that's...
Yeah, they have a judicial.
I mean, you have to take it out of the political process, and there are states that have done commission-type approaches, but in the end, they're still appointed by political actors. But so long as that's the way we do it, we are always going to have this kind of approach where, you know, I mean, we're all sort of, the whole professionalism of the game of elections makes it very difficult to get beyond that.
People were more polite back in the years when they would have those, you know, the pistol duels. At least before they shot you, they said, sir. The problem is we have a lack of civility in our public discourse, and it's the rudeness of many. You know, perhaps when Al Gore invented the internet, he didn't help to create the internet. He didn't foresee the dangers that this would produce in terms of giving people just an extra reason to insult the other side. But we really do need to ensure that we put people in office, statesmen and women, who understand the importance of dialogue, the importance of compromise, the importance of getting things done. Back when I started my career on Capitol Hill, and I know it seems eons away, at 5 o'clock, they would dispense of all of the reporters and everybody out the committee room. The staff people would go and get a bucket. It had ice in it, not water. And the members would sit and cut deals. And they would cut deals based on their constituent concern, of course, the interests of their congressional district, their state, and then we worked it out. But people talk to each other. When members of Congress are only spending less than 2.5 days in Washington, D.C., the staffs are not talking. I mean, most of the Republicans I know, I grew up with them. We worked on the Hill. We were in our 20s. They went and got ice from the same bucket I got my ice from my Democratic side, working with Gillis Long. But they don't do that anymore. So the only way to return civility back to Capitol Hill, back into our political process, is if we force lawmakers to understand that there's a price that they will pay for the lack of civility, for basically acting out of school and insulting each other every afternoon on the House floor and not finding common sense solutions. You know, during that whole debt debate that really turned off the American people, I mean, you know what? We were about $800 billion in a $3 trillion budget year. $800 billion was the difference that we had to make up between the two parties. Right. And yet we couldn't get people in the room to just ham out a deal because they're worried about what their flack gonna say in the back room. So there's no incentive. And I tell you, the only incentive I've ever had to work with a Republican, it was a good one, Katrina. She made landfall, and you know what I said? Mr. Bush, how can I help you? That 2000 election disappeared from my mind. The last thing I thought about was Bush v. Gore in the Supreme Court in 5-4. All I thought about was my dad, my sisters, my brothers, my family, my region, everybody else, and I. For 3 years, I sat and worked with George Bush. And I still call him a friend. And he gave me Super Bowl tickets one year. I like him. Saints won. I'm just trying to tell you, because you're from Wisconsin, we might be penalized, but we ain't dead. And we come back.
Sir.
We'll take one more after this.
You cutting us off, huh?
Actually, I've already got a mic.
Well, yeah, I think that's part of my point. And I would also say, I think the other part of it is, and I don't know what the right word for this is, the nationalization of politics in the sense that now even local elections, I mean, you know, Wisconsin is actually a great place for that, where, you know, pockets of ideologues from across the country now have an easy way to get together and try to impact places far from where they actually are. You know, I mean, that's basically why Olympia Snowe decided she'd had it. I mean, here she is, she's a Republican in Maine, and she said, you know, I'm not Republican enough for some people who live in, you know, Arizona or something. But
last one. Oh, we got two, okay. We got two.
Terry, go
got
ahead.
mics.
Right here and then here. Fine. Either one. It's not working?
The mayor of Asheville, Cheryl, Ms. Bellamy. Come on, sister. Come on. Raise your voice. I'll help you.
There you go.
Terry Bellamy, Mayor of the City of Asheville. Thank you so very much for this opportunity. The only woman who's asked a question all day. Thank you for this opportunity. And my question is about women in politics. And so I'm going to change and shift gears a little bit to talk about how do you see women in moving forward in both parties as we look across this landscape and talking about issues. You know, if we look at how women are depicted in the media who are elected officials, their lens of how they're depicted is completely different than how men are whether they're a Republican or Democrat. So I want to see, how do you view women's roles? I'm sorry we have to talk about this today, but how do we increase the presence of women in positions as well as in administrative appointments?
Well, just real quick, the one thing I think is really unfortunate about it, and you alluded to it, which is the way the media depicts the ascension of a very strong or very accomplished a woman as in politics oftentimes, and I won't get into case studies. I'll talk in generalities because that'll only get me in trouble. As a ploy, as some sort of appeal to a demographic versus looking at their credentials and whether or not those credentials fit the electorate's wants and needs and the pressures of the times. And I think that's a real tough ceiling for a lot of women candidates, because ultimately people start saying, oh, well, she's going to do great because, oh, there's a lot of women voters in that district, or there's a lot of seniors, and and education's a big issue. Just really pigeonholing a lot of these women candidates, when women candidates are as smart and as accomplished on foreign policy, they're as smart and as accomplished. I mean, Hillary Clinton, she was my senator for a long time on national security. I talked to a reporter one time and I said, who is it on Capitol Hill that gets the issue of national security better than anybody? And he said, I talk to generals, I talk to intelligence people every day. And he's like, Hillary Clinton. And a lot of people didn't know that, right? A lot of people would just associate it with the health care of the Clinton administration or listening tours in upstate New York. And so I think that, I look at a lot of the really strong Republican women like Kelly Ayotte and those in executive positions, like Governor Haley in South Carolina, and I think they really do represent a younger, really strong generation of accomplished women Republicans who are going to be great leaders for the party going forward.
We have to encourage more women to run for office, period. I mean, the problem is that we have too few women running for office, too few women in the political pipeline, women in the majority of voters. We're increasingly, head of households, and even in two-wage families. Our income is just as valuable, so it's important that we elect more women to office so that we can make sure that women are able to get what they need out of the economy as well. There's no reason why women should be paid less than men for doing the same work. I don't understand why we're having that conversation also in this cycle, and yet that's a wedge issue. So number one, we need more women, and you ran for Congress. I encourage you to run again. I hope one day to come back to North Carolina, a state my grandfather was born, and you run for governor, and I'll cook you some red beans. God bless you, sis.
Okay, and then our last question.
Kevin, this question's probably primarily for you. I'm David Pope. I'm the mayor of Oak Park, Illinois. I'm also the vice chair of the Transportation Committee of the U.S. Conference. Small amount of background here. I mean, we spent time talking about eliminating earmarks. What we really did is we actually pushed earmarks down to the governors at the state level and put them underground, basically, so we don't actually see where the money's going or how it's getting distributed. But that money's still going out in particular ways. If the mayor of Des Moines was sitting here, he would tell you about allocations dollars where Des Moines, which is 28% of the population of the state of Iowa, ended up receiving about 1/2 of 1% of the infrastructure money that came back to Iowa because of things going on at the state level. My point being, when you look at metropolitan areas where 94% of the job creation over the course of the next 20 years is going to occur, and you look at the importance of stimulating our economy at this very difficult economic time, and you look at the opportunities that exist from those transportation investments in our urban areas, which is everybody around here, Republican, Democrat, we don't wear R's and D's on our sleeve.
Right.
We're all about getting stuff done. What are the prospects of Governor Romney coming out in favor of a sensible T-bill reauth before November? And then if he's elected, when the shoe's on the other foot, what are the prospects of him coming out in favor of a sensible T-bill reauth after November, and what's the difference in terms of, from a substantive policy standpoint, and the idea of actually trying to help put people back to work and help stimulate our economy and help strengthen the urban core that ultimately, fundamentally, is at the base of job creation and economic development opportunities for all of the people of our country going forward.
Yeah, a lot of the questions I get during the campaign about particular pieces of legislation up on Capitol Hill, I think the answer is that I don't expect this to be the 2012 debate to be a proxy debate about what conversations or bills are traveling between offices and wood panel rooms up on Capitol Hill. So I think the debate about transportation, it's an important one. I think the governor recognizes that. I think many Republicans up on Capitol Hill particularly those in those districts that are not only, and you're talking about the urban areas, but those areas that are experiencing incredible growth in the suburbs and the exurbs. In the entire metropolitan area, that's right. So, but I think I worked for a member of Congress who, from New York, and they didn't call them earmarks. They used to call them appropriations achievements. Because in some of those areas outside of places like Albany, well, you know, that was actually my line. That was what I called it when I was his press secretary. So those areas, for example, like, you know, out of some of these growing towns in upstate New York where they've got airports that need growth to handle the growing populations. They need bridges. They need new on and off ramps for technology centers that are being built and are growing. So the recognition that it's a circulatory system of the American economy, I think, is very strong. I think that's guarded against both the American public as well as I think party interest related to whether or not some of this money is spent wisely. And if some of it, I mean, if you remember, the 2008 debate was driven by one bridge going to nowhere in Alaska, and it became emblematic of a discussion about what transportation funding looks like in Washington and whether or not it's a good thing or bad thing, or whether or not we're spending our money wisely. So I think that debate has actually altered the conversation to the point where we're looking and actually rooting through bills to find out, because no mayor, no governor, no county executive wants to have to explain that they were out there supporting something that was wasteful or wasn't working, right? No congressman wants to have to do that as part of re-election. So I think it shifted that debate, and so I think that that's something that we just have to guard against. So I think that in a potential Romney administration, there will be a very strong focus on that, but there will be as much as an emphasis on the importance of building up that circulatory system for the American economy so that towns and cities and growth, that they can continue to grow and that their economies can be sustained.
There are so many cities with projects that are stalled today all across the country because this highway money, this transportation money could jumpstart those projects. We've identified them. Some have been through the procurement process. They're waiting on Congress to act. No, you can't go around and cherry pick what parts of Congress you like. Mr. Ryman took a strong position on the Ryan budget. He's taken a position on the student loan rate. He needs to take a strong position on transportation. This is about the health of the arteries, the veins, and everything else that moves our economy, that will grow us, that will keep us competitive. China is building 10,000 miles of new railways. I mean, when you look across the Far East, and that's where I spend most of my mornings at 3 o'clock. I get that 3 o'clock call too. And I just go to China on CNBC, and they are spending money on their infrastructure development. And back here at home, we're still debating what? The bridge to nowhere from 2008. There are many projects on the table. I tell you, if I was a mayor, I would send my projects to Mr. Romney and Mr. Obama and say, hey, they're ready to be funded. Help us out.
Donna Brazil, Kevin Madden, and Scott Montgomery. Give them a big hand, everybody. Thank you for sharing your insights and your expertise, and we could be prouder to have you, and all of you, including with your broken knee there. Thank you very much. All right, big hand, everybody. Let me call on Charlotte Mayor Anthony Fox, the co-chair of our Small Business and Franchising Task Force, for an update on new tools mayors have to help small businesses. Mayor Fox?
Thank you, Mayor Villaraigosa. As mayors, we know that the jobs we need are not created in the halls of government. But we also know that the conditions upon which jobs are created can be created in the halls of government. And thanks to our great leadership, we are pushing Congress to take an up or down vote on the American Jobs Act. We hold out hope that they will interrupt the busy work of the summer recess that will be coming up soon to consider it. But even if they don't, we are still left with residents who need us to point out a way to create jobs. My fellow mayors, Small businesses can be part of that pathway. They are a vital part of the answer to growing jobs, and the leadership of my co-chair of the Small Business and Franchising Task Force, Mayor Elizabeth Kautz, and I, along with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, are committed to helping cities and small businesses gain a deeper understanding of what it takes to succeed and to help connect entrepreneurs with capital and credit. Across the country, small businesses make up 99.7% of all employer firms, 59.7 million private sector jobs, and 43% of the total U.S. private payroll. Over the past 17 years, small businesses have been responsible for nearly 2/3 of the 15 million net new jobs created in the U.S. And they are valuable incubators of information, generating 16.5 times more patents per employee than their larger counterparts. On the local level, the value of small businesses goes well beyond the measurable dimensions of jobs and income. They anchor neighborhoods and stimulate the need for revival in communities that are underserved. They are community landmarks with faces as familiar as next-door neighbors. They sponsor local activities. They offer role models and learning opportunities for young people and provide the cohesion every locality needs to thrive in times of challenge and opportunity. To make these numbers happen and to sustain their contributions to their communities, small businesses need capital to get started and grow. Several years ago, I asked the leadership of the U.S. Conference of Mayors to help assemble a toolkit for mayors to use to help their communities create better access for small businesses. As co-chair of the Small Business and Franchising Task Force, I saw an opportunity to gain access to information and put it in the hands of U.S. mayors. Tools that today, with the support of Bank of America, I am thrilled to share with you today the Mayor's Resource Guide for Access to Capital. This tool was designed to give you, our nation's mayors, a pathway for your communities to improve opportunities for small business. This small business pamphlet contains an overview of federal programs that facilitate small business lending, of initiatives by lenders large and small to make capital more readily available, and information that will help startups and cities create the kind of conversations and the kind of connections that will allow our small businesses to grow and prosper and create jobs. You will receive a copy of this brochure on Saturday, and we will also be sending a copy to you in the mail next week. As mayor of the nation's second largest financial services center in the country, it was particularly important for me to reaffirm to you the commitment of lenders in supporting small business. In late 2010, Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan pledged to the White House to increase lending to small businesses. He later announced that the bank would hire more than 1,000 small business bankers by mid-2012. As of 3 weeks ago, the bank had hired more than 700 of those 1,000. And in North and South Carolina, Bank of America has hired 45 small business bankers, including 12 in the Charlotte area, as a broader push to increase services and lending for small companies. Though small business lending remains a relatively small piece of the bank, Bank of America reported recently that new loans to businesses with less than $20 million in revenue increased 20% in 2011 to $6.4 billion. Among businesses with less than $5 million in revenue, lending increased 63% in the fourth quarter from the quarter before. The bank has also rolled out a number of new products for small businesses, including payroll software and 401k plans. As an example of their commitment to supporting small businesses and municipalities with access to capital, Bank of America has stepped up and sponsored the publication of the Mayor's Access to Capital Resource Guide. And so it is now my pleasure to introduce Janet Lampkin from Bank of America to speak further about the bank's commitment. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you, Mayor, and I want to thank you so sincerely for your great leadership of the task force on this ever-increasingly important issue. As we all know, small business is the backbone of all of our communities, and we could not be more pleased at Bank of America to sponsor this reference guide that I believe will help every mayor and their staff to better assist small businesses in your community. As was referenced, the good news is small business lending has increased. Over the first quarter of this year, it's up 21% from last year. That's the great news. But of course, unfortunately, not every small business is able to access conventional credit. Either they haven't been in business long enough or they don't qualify for other factors. And that's an important segment to help as well. And I believe this reference guide with all of the different sources of capital to those businesses will be extraordinarily helpful. Another helpful tool is the CDFI community, Community Development Financial Institutions. They're designed to help the riskier businesses so that they can get credit worthy and access capital. So again, we want to thank the conference for this great partnership on this ever-increasing important issue and thank the Mayor again for his leadership.
Thank you very much. This session is adjourned. Oh, hey, they even have it written out for me. This session is adjourned. Please move on to our task force and other things. Thank you.